I'm speaking in good faith today with members of the Woolf Institute with an association at Cambridge University. And we'll talk more about that. I want to get right to introducing our guests. First, Dr. Esther-Miriam Wagner, Executive Director of the Woolf Institute. Miriam, thank you for coming today.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
Also, Dr. Emma Harris. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you so much.
And she's the Director of Grants Management and Alumni Relations at the Woolf Institute. I'm going to give just a little bit more background here real quickly before we get into our conversation. Miriam is a Fellow of St. Edmund's College, Cambridge, an affiliate lecturer at the Faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies, teaches with a Master's of Philosophy in Middle Eastern Studies, Muslim and Jewish Relations at the University of Cambridge, and chairs the Woolf Institute panels and webinars, including the Institute's How to Talk About series, which, among other topics, has considered religious rights and freedom of speech and humor and religion. What's the website? Where would people look for this?
You can find all this on the Woolf Institute webpage.
Wonderful. Dr. Emma Harris, I mentioned, Director of Grants Management and Alumni Relations. She works closely with the Executive Director, and she's led strategic and operational plans for teaching at the Woolf Institute. Between 2018 and 2022, she managed the Diversity in End-of-Life Care training program and led on the development of the Woolf Institute publication Diversity in End-of-Life Care, a handbook on caring for Jewish, Christian, and Muslim patients. Both of you, I have to start by asking the Woolf Institute, founded in 1998, why was it begun and have the aims changed over time? Miriam.
The Institute was founded because our founder president, Dr. Ed Kessler, was not quite so happy with the way that religion was being viewed in secular Britain. Alistair Campbell, who was an advisor to the Prime Minister at the time, famously said, "We don't do religion in the UK." And this was sort of the impetus for Ed to found an institute that would deal with religion and society. And his specific research interest is Jewish-Christian relations. So we started out as a center for Jewish-Christian relations, and then September 11th happened. And people understood we needed to include the Muslim faith as well. So we founded a Jewish-Muslim Relations Center as well. And then those two centers merged into the Woolf Institute, an institute that concentrates on the Abrahamic faith, but we also include other religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, and so on.
And I wonder, Emma, if I could ask you, for people who work at the Institute, I'm assuming there's no requirement for belief or adhering to a particular tradition. I'm thinking likely many people do have a personal belief. How does that work in an institute like that connected to the academy?
I think that's probably something that is, you've already touched on the word connectedness. And I think that's how each of us feels within the Institute, that whatever faith we draw on each other's faiths, each other's beliefs, and we can actually create something that is just so special that when people come into the Institute, we are a community in itself. And we bring people in, and when students come from BYU, they are part and parcel of the team. They are part and parcel of our community.
So you're really modeling right there in the Institute what you want to teach people to do outside, it sounds like.
Most definitely. I always remember a few years ago, I think it was probably before COVID, we had a lecture, and I can't actually remember what the lecture was about. But at the end of it, it was quite a big audience, and a gentleman in the audience stood up, and before he asked his question, and I'm actually not sure there was a question, but he said, "I want to thank the Woolf Institute for allowing me to be here today." And it was quite a dramatic start to what he was saying. He said, "I'm a humanist, and I feel as though I'm supported here, that I can actually be here, that I am welcomed as a humanist, as a human being." And I think that sort of really resonated with me.
Create a connection even between secular people, non-religious people and religious people, a place where we can learn about one another, we can learn about faith, but we can also make sure that people of no faith understand where people of faith come from, which is, I think, something that's quite lacking in the UK. This lack of understanding what it means to be a person of faith.
Yep. And this may seem like the most obvious question of all, but why does that matter?
Ooh. The easy-sounding questions are always the most difficult, aren't they? I mean, we know that we live in these quite sort of fracturing societies at the moment. And there are a lot of things that divide us. And there are a lot of things that are being used to drive communities apart. And I think faith is one of those reasons. But faith communities have so much to offer. There's so much knowledge. There's so much old inherited wisdom. There is so much meaning making. There is power in the ritual that cannot be found in the secular world. And I think to convey that, to see the richness for coping with everyday life that faith and rituals have to offer and religious traditions have to offer, I think is something that is really, really worth sharing.
Well, I would love in just a moment to get into the experience that students and interns have when they, and others who come to the Institute. I would like to ask Emma, because you are connected with the University of Cambridge, first of all, why is that? And second, is there any pushback from the academic world about why are we including a religiously connected institute?
Thank you for a difficult question. So we are connected in various ways to the university. One of the ways is through the Cambridge Theological Federation, which is something that I'm particularly passionate about. We teach students that are training for Christian ministry. And I think for me that is something that is really special because I'm often the only Jew in the room. So I'm teaching students training for Christian ministry, talk to them about Jewish observance in various ways. And so that is one of the ways that we're connected to the university. Also, I mean, Miriam will be able to speak about this more. We teach on an MPhil in Middle Eastern studies, specifically Muslim-Jewish relations. Miriam is heavily involved with that. And we also have an academic agreement with St Edmund's College, which is one of the 31 Cambridge colleges.
And especially at St Edmund's, there is actually a real interest in exploring religion and making religion sort of a discussions of religion part of college life. St Edmund's is a very, very diverse college. We have, I think, students from 107 countries,
wow,
something like that. Or maybe it's the same figures as Brigham Young, that we were sort of heard yesterday. But we have a lot of people from the global south, from sort of Commonwealth countries, which come with a faith background. So actually St Edmund's, quite unusually, is a college that has a real interest in world religions. And in a sense, Cambridge and Oxford as well are anomalies in the academic landscape in Britain because faith is still quite a part of the education there. Normally, universities are very secular in Britain, but both Oxford and Cambridge have affiliated houses that train clergy and ministry. So, in a sense, Christian religion is quite at home in Oxbridge, but it is the non-Christian faith that need to be brought into the discussion, and this is something that we do.
We often hear that interfaith work sometimes can turn into just occasional lunch meetings with not great food and just sort of learning each other's names and to shake hands and say it's nice we acknowledge that each other exists. But I think you have a hope for something concrete to happen after people have had the training or visited the Institute. Can you tell me what that would be? What you hope shows up in the lives of those people?
Yes. I mean, we understand how important it is to bring about encounter. But in order to produce meaningful encounter, it's not enough just to get together, know each other's names and, eat bad food perhaps, or, maybe good food if you're lucky, or, sing some songs.
I'm sure it's good food at your institute.
So, kumbaya and samosas are sort of sometimes the way that certain types of interfaith dialogue is being described. But I think we found, and we actually have done a research project on that, we found that people only feel that meaningful dialogue and meaningful encounters are being produced when difficult subjects are being discussed. So you have to go to the meaty parts. You have to go to the difficult things. Yesterday we had a meeting with students, and I ascribed one of our sort of religious freedom and freedom of speech conversations that we had. And there are uncomfortable conversations. I mean, there are conversations where people have to understand that there are red lines in other people's discourse which we can't cross, otherwise the dialogue shuts down. We talked about, for example, denial of Holocaust or something. If you want to talk to a Jewish person, you can't deny the Holocaust. That is the end of a conversation. Or if you talk to a Muslim person, then talking about Muhammad is actually a really, really difficult subject. It's very interesting. In a conversation we had, we found out that, for example, a lot of Muslim students we had would not have a problem with saying someone saying God is dead, like in a very Nietzsche sense. That would be no problem. But to say something bad about Muhammad is where the red lines are. Mm-hmm. So finding out where the red lines are is important. Apparently, the students yesterday said it had to do with the temple. Sort of Latter-day Saints have a red line when it comes to descriptions of the temple, negative descriptions of the temple, which we found really, really interesting.
I could see that culturally, yeah.
So exploring where the red lines are, but then within what is possible, really discuss problems. You know, what sort of things come about as a consequence of friction between religious groups. And how can we solve that? How can we approach this? For example, problematic Quranic passages, problematic passages in the Bible. The Bible is extremely violent towards people of non-Jewish faith. The Old Testament, obviously, is very different in the New Testament. But to basically discuss these problematic passages in Scripture, talk about problematic, frictious points of encounter in everyday life. I think this is something really, really important. And what we really value in the Institute is that it's not just us sort of bringing people together and talking about shared past, commonalities, but it's also about actually seeing the students in action, creating the space where they really learn about one another. We had a Woolf Institute wedding where two of our students got married and they had a baby, and they shared that, you know, the first thing you do when you have a Muslim baby is whisper into the ear a particular verse to make sure that they sort of are taken into the Muslim faith. These sort of intimate little details that create immediacy between people and lead to relationships that transcend religious boundaries.
Well, that's so beautiful also to know ways in which we might possibly step on each other's toes, especially before we've established trust and all of that. So we were privileged to speak with some of the students who had a wonderful experience being at the Institute. So when students arrive, I'm wondering if you can tell us what they will encounter, what classes, what discussions, what will their experience be like? And really, I'd love to hear maybe some light bulb moments if you see change happening or the light going on in somebody, oh, I get it.
So when the students first arrive, it's me that they encounter first. And I'm always really excited, I have to say. I mean, for me, having BYU students in our institute is just it's an incredible moment when they have such great insights. They have such wonderful ideas about what they want to get out of the summer programme itself. I actually met them before they came to Cambridge this year. So Janae, who was our intern, and myself were actually in London for the launch of a report at Westminster. And the students, quite by chance, happened to be returning from Winchester. And we met them in Parliament Square Gardens in a semicircle. I'm being introduced to them. And there was this, first of all, I'm sure there was a bit of fear, this sort of, academic from Cambridge, which I am not. But maybe that's how, you're introduced as Dr. Harris, so there's an assumption there. But, getting to know each small groups afterwards was just so special. They were asking me, what do you hope that we're going to get out of this programme? That's a really difficult question to actually answer, because really it's about them, the essence that they feel that they want to get. Why are they here? Why have they joined us in Cambridge? What has really interested them about joining this particular programme? Religion and society from the medieval to the modern. Is the title of the programme. They're going to talk about. They're going to hear about. We're going to go through, history. We're going to talk, sociology, philosophy. They're going to talk about, really difficult subjects like anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. But I just hope that they feel connected in some way to all these particular topics.
But how enlightening to have those same conversations about those difficult topics. They could have those here, but to have a discussion of anti-Semitism with Jewish people
Exactly.
there, or anti-Islamic sentiment with adherence to Islam right there. I mean,
Exactly.
that makes it real.
Most definitely. And being able to visit the mosque, engaging with the local imam, speaking with the local rabbi, having those kind of encounters is very special in Cambridge.
Yeah, I mean the visit to the mosque was one of the big highlights last time, and it's sort of connecting students from Brigham Young to the lived experience of minority communities in Britain. I think is something that is very powerful. I think sort of the light bulb moments that you mentioned. We often have that when we talk about historical connections. People are absolutely unaware, for example, how Arab the Jewish religion is in its core. People think about modern Judaism. They think about Ashkenazi communities and famous TV comedians that sort of embodies, or maybe the Städter life is sort of embodying Jewish life. But of course, before that, the majority of Jewish culture was Arabic speaking and grew up in a Muslim Muslim empire. So talking about that and actually making sure that people sort of get a changed perspective from what, for example, Muslim-Jewish relations are often viewed through the prism, or the political prism at the time. And another sort of light bulb moments where the students actually came to us and said, "My life has changed," has been that we connect them to academics in Cambridge, Oxford, and also London. So we study the research proposals we get for each student quite carefully, and then we'll try to find people who can really help that person. And we've had a few times where we managed to match the incoming student, with a supervisor that completely changed the way they view the topic, or that connected them to a research world they had previously been unconnected to. And it's so rewarding when you have students come and say, my life has changed as a consequence of this short supervision I had. And it goes both ways. People actually come back to us, the supervisors, who very kindly do this as a favor for the Woolf Institute to supervise these students. But they come back and said, I think very different now about the Latter-day Saints community. Connecting to these really clever students, our own academics actually feel that their perceptions are changing because of the curious natures of the BYSU students, which we really can't emphasize enough. The students who come from BYU to us are curious, are incredibly bright. They ask incredibly pertinent questions. We teach them, and people come out of those sessions. And normally summer school teaching isn't easy. You sit there with a crowd of people who really like to be outside and maybe play ball and go punting down the cam. But the teachers that teach these classes, these summer school classes for BBA students, all report how invigorating the lesson has been for them, and how some of the questions that the clever questions that the students have asked, actually changed some of the perspectives they had on their own research. So it goes both ways, but it's a really, really beautiful experience, I hope, for everyone involved.
And it's also about the respect that they show for those of other faiths. I hosted, and this was the first time I'd ever hosted, a Friday night Shabbat dinner. And the incredible way that they took all the rituals on board, that they wanted to understand more about, why do we have, 2 loaves of bread, the challah, why do we use salt on it, something that it was just their enthusiasm for understanding somebody else's faith was really wonderful, and quite overwhelming at times as well, from me personally.
You talked about a fractured society when we first started, but I don't think either of you could do what you do without some sort of underlying sense of hope. Because if you just couldn't make a difference, why do it? Do you feel that?
I am an incorrigible optimist. It's a disease, because sometimes I am a bit too optimistic about everything.
May it spread far and wide.
Yes. But I think, especially in this time, it's an absolute essential tool to be a leader of an institute. There's absolutely no other way. You have to be an optimist. Because there's so many things that bring us down at the moment. We have climate change, we have war in Ukraine, which is very close to our, where we are. It's really not far away. You could do it easily in a car ride. We see conflict brewing in all sorts of societies where you have this sort of schism between the right and the left, and over quite sort of issues that used to be non-issues in the past. So keeping up hope and keeping up the understanding that if we really utilize all sources at our disposal, which include faith communities, we can easily overcome. I mean, humans are incredibly resourceful and incredibly inventive. So understanding that we also use and utilize faith communities to bring about change for the better, I think is absolutely essential.
It seems very important to you that we learn to appreciate each other in our differences without requiring letting go of those core beliefs. But for instance, I'm looking for the title of your book here. So Dr. Harris, Diversity in End-of-Life Care, a Handbook on Caring for Jewish, Christian, and Muslim Patients. So there are certain things, just as an example, the title of your book, that where you might do or make room for particular rituals that would be individual to those specific faiths. But do you feel like a moment like the passing of a loved one, is there something that's just a common human spiritual experience in that?
Oh, most definitely. That is very true. But I think for nurses, doctors, volunteers within hospices and hospitals whom we have worked with over the years, they have great concerns about how to deal with those moments, how to look after not just the patients but also their families. And I myself have experienced it. I lost both my parents last year. My mum passed away in hospital. My dad passed away in a care home. But the hospital were incredible. They knew all about Judaism. They understood about what they needed to do when my mother had passed, who was going to come to collect the body. But with my dad in the care home, they knew nothing about Judaism. And, what was the process? What would they need to do? And I think that, for them, they've only ever dealt with Christian patients or for those patients that have no faith, and for them that was very natural for them. It was sort of like the normalcy for them. But once you brought in Judaism into the mix, they wanted to understand. They wanted to be very supportive of me, since it was me that was going to have to do with it. I'm only child, I'm the only one there. But they were able to help me. They were able to call the right people within the community. And I think for staff, for the administrators as well, they want to be able to understand as much as possible. And that is what the handbook is actually provides. There are case studies in there of specific situations within Judaism, Christianity and Islam that can be supportive to people that are working within those environments.
And end-of-life care, I think, is also one of those areas, one of those projects that really, really show the importance of our institute, because I think this is one of the problems of secular society, the separation from death. In Britain, it's an epidemic. I mean, a lot of people will never have seen a dead body, whereas a lot of religious rituals actually deal with relatives and people who taking care of the body. And this is really, really important.
It's maybe even part of their process to deal with it.
Oh, but you can't mourn without actually saying goodbye to the physical sphere. I mean, that's impossible, right? But in Britain, there are a lot of people go into hospitals and care homes, and you never see them when they die. And I think for us, actually, to make sure that we also thematize death and, how it belongs to life, how it's part of life, as part of religious traditions, I think is very important for meaning making as well.
And to be able to tell nurses and doctors that the handbook helped me as well. I'm kind of almost a product of that. That it was able, it gave me the confidence to be able to talk to members of staff. And we did work during the pandemic as well. How did religion play out during that time? Because obviously, families couldn't go to the hospitals, they couldn't be with their loved ones. How were last rites administered? And all these aspects that would be normal part of the dying process that they weren't able to do. So there is material on that as well.
I'm very sorry. Also, both parents in 1 year. Sorry to hear that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
How has working at the Institute and sort of rubbing shoulders with so many people of various viewpoints and faiths, has that affected your own faith or understanding of God or the divine in some way?
Interesting. One of the students asked us that yesterday.
So you've got a ready answer or an equally difficult answer.
That I teach, as I said earlier, I teach students that are training for Christian ministry, and I'm often asked about prayer. Having deep philosophical discussions about how we pray, and it had never really occurred to me. And I remember taking the students to a tour around one of the local synagogues in Cambridge, and sitting. So this is an Orthodox community, so men and women sit separately. And everybody was invited to sit on the men's side. And I felt a bit uncomfortable doing that, even though there was no service going on. So I sort of sat a little bit away from everybody whilst they were engaged with the rabbi in a conversation. And it occurred to me that when I'm sitting in my seat in the synagogue and I am praying, I have this direct access to God. I'm praying directly to Him. Whereas, the men are leading the service. They are, making sure that everybody's on the right page, or that they're, specific prayers that they have to lead on, waiting for responses from the congregation. But I am praying directly to God. And it had never occurred to me until I started teaching students, training for Christian ministry, that is something that I should feel very, very blessed. That is something that is part of my everyday being when I'm in synagogue. So that for me was something that is a really big takeaway for me that I'd never thought of before I started at the Institute.
Any comment, Miriam?
Can I share the anecdote that I shared yesterday with a smaller class of students? So for me, it's really, really interesting to see how in some of our projects, we had, for example, a gender and religion project a few years ago. And one of the big sort of outcomes of that was that the interfaith sphere is where a lot of very orthodox people may actually be able to claim roles that they can't claim otherwise. So, for example, our project accompanied these initiatives of Muslim and Jewish women, where the Jewish and Muslim women would pray together. And normally, both in Judaism, both in Orthodox Judaism and in Islam, women can't really take on leading roles in prayer. But because they were only women, they had to. And somehow, quite a few of them, Jewish and Muslim, then took it back into the communities and said, I have led the prayer now. I should be able to also lead the prayer with the women here. And we had a very interesting Shabbat dinner that Emma organized with our last students. And it was the first time, this interfaith setting was the first time that Emma sang in front of men. Because normally Jewish women can only sing these ritualistic songs in front of women. But she did it in the interfaith setting. This allowed her for the first time to sing in front of men. So it's these interfaith settings can actually be really, really interesting ways for people who are a little bit marginalized to claim authority within their religion, which I find absolutely fascinating. And for me, I think what I take most from my work is the power of ritual, the power of religious ritual, the framing that religion allows for every day to continue despite hardships. And I think this is something where there's actually no replacement. Secular society don't have any mechanisms to deal with what happens when life throws lemons at you. Maybe the whole lemonade and then selling it and making it killing and sort of having a capitalist paradigm, it may work for some, but it doesn't work for, the majority of people. So I think for me is really seeing our sort of very religious, very devout student cohort and see how they use their faith as the resource to go through life and to keep mental health. There's a massive mental health epidemic in Britain. Probably is the same here. Right?
Yes.
People after the pandemic, they really struggle. They really struggle to go through everyday life. And I can see that those people who have faith have an easier time because they have patterns and rituals that sort of keep them grounded. And I think this is something that I really have taken away from myself, this importance of religious ritual.
Well, I love hearing the sense of mission that you each have in different ways about your work. There are a number of initiatives at the Woolf Institute. Could I hear from each of you maybe about one that's important to you? Or does my question even make sense according to what you do?
Well, we have so many project babies that we can't have favorite children. But having said that, one of my favorite initiatives is something that we call the Quran and Bible reading group. So we have a friend of the Institute, Rick Sofer, who's extremely interested in the Quran. He's Jewish, but he's a great lover of scripture, and he loves the Quran. He loves reading the Quran. And he said, what you academics do, it doesn't really translate to normal people like us. I want you to produce something that we can understand. So we basically started convening this group with the absolute top academics in the field, who gave presentations on their work. And then he would drill down. He would ask incredibly clever questions, but on a level that is really understandable to the wider public. About things, about scripture, about difficult things in scripture, about violence, the role of violence in religion. And for me, this has been one of the most amazing projects to learn, for example, how a lot of the what we see as sort of Muslim Jewish elements of faith, sort of fasting, not fasting, ritual slaughter, kosher, halal food, things like that, how they actually came about through Christian mediation, sort of to learn about the Christian role in the emergence of Islam, and to learn about the faith communities, living together in 7th century Arabia. For me, this has been one of the most intellectually rewarding projects that really sort of changed the way I think about medieval faith communities. So this is definitely one of the projects that's closest to my heart.
So for me, I think it's the religious diversity in end-of-life care is obviously something that is extremely close to my heart. But I think keeping on the literary theme, I teach a course on representations of Jewish-Christian relations in literature. It's English literature. We talk about Chaucer, Shakespeare, Maria Edgeworth, Charles Dickens and George Eliot. But actually hearing from the students about how they interpret the excerpts that we look at has been really interesting. What we read impacts us. And, literature is a very powerful tool, and being able to engage with the students, even though it's an online program, we're able to do that through discussion forums. We have live sessions as well. But literature can evoke really strong feelings, and we talk about Shylock's monologue, hath not a Jew,
Yes.
hath not a Jew
Yes.
eyes, and that, and how do we think about that? How does that resonate with us? Love your neighbour as yourself. There are so many similarities, within Judaism and Christianity, that we can really pull from some of these literary works. So it's something that that over the years we've been able to sort of gather really interesting cohorts to have those interesting conversations, talk about the perceptions, talk about the stereotypes, the untruths, and how we can move forward and how we can dispel those in the 21st century.
And the power of narrative, right? I mean, I always wonder with the Shylock monologue how many people's minds about the other, but for example the Jewish faith, have been changed as a consequence of reading the Shylock monologue.
And even what it meant at the time Shakespeare wrote it and how audiences may have perceived that. 2 years ago, I went to a Utah Shakespeare Festival and saw a production, and the ending was astounding to me. I'd never seen it like this. As they were reading the pronouncement of the punishment of Shylock, what he was required to do, and I don't know if this is a standard staging, but I'd never seen it. On an upper level, we see it enacted with them taking off the symbols of Judaism and placing Christian symbols on him, and the pain he's going through totally changed my perception. And he doesn't come off as a sympathetic character necessarily in that play, although we come to sort of feel for what's imposed on him. Wow. Just that little staging element totally changed my thinking about, or deepened my thinking about. There's just one literary example. That's really beautiful that you would bring that up.
What we really want people to know about the Woolf Institute is that for us, it is so important to bring about the encounter, to break down barriers, and we do it by, informing people about other people's faiths. But we don't do it in an intellectual capacity. We don't do it in an intellectual. We do it through living example, I think, and that's the most important thing, because people will only learn when they experience something themselves. So, bringing about the physical encounter is really at the heart of most of the things that we do.
Dr. Esther-Miriam Wagner is the Executive Director of the Woolf Institute, and Dr. Emma Harris is the Director of Grants Management and Alumni Relations at the Woolf Institute. What a pleasure to hear from both of you. Thank you for speaking with me today in good faith.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much for having us. It was a great pleasure.